Hi, welcome to the Naturalist training. My name is Deb Kramer. I'm the founder and executive director of Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful, and I'll be your moderator. I love exploring and learning about nature. And over the past 10 years, I've had the great fortune to build a community around Coyote Creek through KCCB's events. Through our BioBlitz events, I've met some truly amazing people. In this presentation, you will meet two of them. Today, we'll talk about the survival strategies that bird families use to raise their birds in Santa Clara County. Listen in as Marav Von Schack and Carolyn Knight showcase the birds and how to best spot and document them. We'll close with time for Q&A. But first, I want to tell you about Coyote Creek. It's a 64-mile long river, technically. You can navigate it. It starts at Henry Coe State Park. It winds through Coyote Valley right along Highway 101. Through downtown San Jose to the east of it, into Milpitas, and finally into San Francisco Bay through the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. There's a huge diversity of wildlife and a number of different ecosystems. And Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful, I founded in 2015, so we are celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. And what we do is we care for and advocate for the creek. We educate people about the value of having a healthy creek, and we also offer recreational activities to connect you with the watershed. And I like to say that it's all connected. So we have our 3 E's: engage, educate, and encourage. And we engage people to really provide a voice for the creek. And we do that by picking up trash, having people share their experiences, and even going to council meetings. We also encourage people to participate in fun activities, get some fresh air. Probably remember we did a lot of that during COVID, and also to meet new people. It's pretty amazing how many people say, I love coming out to these events because I get to meet new people. And finally, we love to help people learn about the watershed. And you're here tonight to learn more about nature. So we want to share with people what's so special, especially in our urban landscapes. So as I mentioned, KCCB really wants to build community around nature. And you can see in some of these pictures here that we have people engaging with others to enjoy being outdoors in nature. And we have a lot of lovely critter pictures that Marav has taken and shared with us. So just visually, this is what the creek looks like if you were to look at the eye in the sky. And as you can see, it starts at Henry Coe, makes kind of a backwards J through San Jose and out to Milpitas. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different ecosystems within it. So up in the Henry Coe area, you've got these, just like in my background for Zoom, beautiful ridges with pine trees and beautiful wildflowers that you should start to see at this time of year. Through Coyote Valley, we have an amazing open space, whether it's farmland or natural space, that has, a lot of it has been preserved. And that's a big part of what our organization has done, and Carolyn's as well, through the Bird Alliance, to really get out there and raise our voices so that those areas can be preserved. And then downtown San Jose, there's an area that is called Coyote Meadows. And it's just north of just south of Highway 280 near Kelly Park. And it's a beautiful open space area that we really would love to see become a park. And then finally, if you haven't been out to the Bay Trail or to the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge, I hope that you get a chance to see it because, again, the ecosystem there really changes. And Coyote Creek covers all of them. We have had this Naturalist training series for 2 years now. It's pretty amazing. We have a whole archive of the different training that we've done, and it's all archived on the Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful YouTube channel. So you can go to that selection and be able to see the training series. So at this time, I would like to introduce my friend and colleague, Marav Von Schack. So she founded BioBlitz Club, a community science organization to encourage people to get outside and learn about nature. And through this group's actions over the nearly past 8 years, we've hosted 146 events, and over 2,000 people have participated and contributed to the growing body of knowledge about nature through iNaturalist. And Rob's going to open our presentation by giving an overview of insects and some basics about them, and also about some of the upcoming events that she has.
Okay, so yeah, let's talk about some upcoming events. So that beautiful map that we just saw with Coyote Creek and where it goes, this is where we visit for most of our events. So I partner with Deb and organize BioBlitz events along Coyote Creek in different spots, like this place, Kelly Park, where we'll be this Saturday from 9 to 11:30. Just in 2 words, a BioBlitz is an event where we go out to a place like Kelly Park and we try and document as many species of living things as we can within about 2 hours. We use an app called iNaturalist, and we teach people quickly how to use the app and how to document biodiversity. And it's really fun. It's a wonderful way to get out, to get people to learn about our local nature, about Coyote Creek, and about other locations that we visit as well. So these events are anything from 20 to 100 people, depending on the event and the group that I partner with. And yeah, they're just really fun. I highly encourage you to join us if you haven't been to one yet. And if you're not local, then you might find some events near you. Or you could choose to organize them yourself. We have a couple of webinars about that as well. So our upcoming event, as I mentioned, is Kelly Park. And then right after that, on Sunday, we'll have another event with a different group. This one will be in Tulare Hill, which is a really special place in Coyote Valley, right by, not exactly Coyote Creek, but the area that Deb mentioned. So it's really beautiful and really special. And this is just an amazing time to be outside when we still have some of our late winter flowers and we're starting to see some spring flowers. Is just really special. And right after that, early April, I'll have an event at the refuge at the bay. And this will be a tabling event, which is a different thing, as well as a small BioBlitz event. Caroline will be there as well, leading some bird walks. So you should join us. It will be really fun. All these events and more you can find on my website, BioBlitz Club. And you could see all these different events and you could sign up to them and, get them on your calendar. The rest of the events I wanted to mention are part of this brilliant event called the City Nature Challenge. It's this friendly competition on iNaturalist. Started exactly 10 years ago. So this will be the 10-year anniversary. It started as a competition between LA and the Bay Area, the entire Bay Area, so all 9 counties touching the Bay. And back then, 2016, it was just these 2 cities with, about 20,000 observations and 2,000 species or so. And as you can see here in this table, it just started growing and growing exponentially. So this year we'll have about 700 cities participating worldwide. Okay, so it's no longer just the US, it's many different countries and many cities in some of these countries. And they each compete about the number of observations, the number of species, and the number of people participating. Okay. And during that event, so the event will be, I'll have the dates on the next slide. During the event, it's actually a long weekend. It's a 4-day weekend. People log in observations on iNaturalist, and then we have a few more days to identify them. And usually during that period of time, lots of different groups organize BioBlitz events and nature walks and such. So I'll show you a few of the events that I'm planning. We also have a webinar that we've done last year just about the City Nature Challenge. So if you're interested, please check it out. I think it's just fun. It's just a fun way to, go out and document things. And we always find interesting things in our BioBlitz in general, but also on the City Nature Challenge. there's always new discoveries, which is really cool. So here we have the dates. So this year we'll be logging observations between April 25th and April 28th. So it's a Friday to Monday weekend. And then we'll have a few more days to finish uploading observations and identifying them. So even if, you can't get out, you didn't document anything, but you still want to help and participate, you could help by identifying observations of other people in the Bay Area. Don't help other cities, of course. Just kidding. But we will be actually holding a City Nature Challenge ID party in the South Bay. We've done that for 2 years already. It's really fun. So I highly encourage you to join us. It's a very small event. It's like potluck. It's really fun. Anyway, the events that I'm organizing for this year, the public ones, would be a shoreline BioBlitz event with grassroots ecology at the Bay. And that's a really fun one. And then I have one at the West Valley College Wildflower Show. It's a macro photography walk and a BioBlitz during the Wildflower Show, which is a really wonderful event that will be in the afternoon of the same day. Both are Saturday, and then on Sunday, Deb and I will have a BioBlitz Almaden Quicksilver, which is a beautiful place to spend a spring morning. There are so many flowers there. It's just incredible. So yes, join us. And then on the Tuesday, right after that, we'll have the ID party. So even if you don't know how to identify any single organism, you could still help us out, and we will explain how when you get there. Okay, but it's just a nice little event. Okay, and I think this is my part. So any questions about our events, the City Nature Challenge, iNaturalist, BioBlitzes?
All right. So I'm actually going to, before Carolyn starts, I'm going to introduce her. So, Carolyn Knight works for the Santa Clara Valley Bird Alliance as the education and outreach specialist, where she gets to use her degree in wildlife biology to share her enthusiasm for nature with the community. I've known her for, gosh, I guess it's almost the 10 years that I've been working on Coyote Creek, and I'm always impressed with not only the wonderful things that Carolyn has to share about birds and nature, but also just how she seems to be everywhere. So keep your eyes open and be sure to look for Carolyn at whatever event you're going to be at. So go ahead, Carolyn. Why don't you take it away?
Thank you. Yeah, I get around, especially in the springtime. So I am very excited to be talking bird families with all of you today. And one of the things that I am most excited about with this talk in particular is I really get the opportunity to highlight all of the amazing behaviors that are actually really easy for us as naturalists and as observers to miss if you don't know what to look for. So as we're entering into spring, um, spring is when the birds are going to be showing off. This is when they start singing at ridiculously early hours of the day. This is when they're wearing their brightest colors. So they shed the old dull feathers that they wore through the wintertime and grow in new feathers that tend to be really brightly colored. Everything from bright reds and yellows to blues and greens or blacks and whites to catch the eye of potential mates, but it catches our eyes as well. We see birds actively searching for nesting sites. So we can see birds starting to scratch at the ground if they're going to be nesting on the ground in a cup nest that they scratch out. We see birds poking at trees and sometimes even buildings looking for cavities that they can wedge their nests away in. And we also see a lot of territoriality. So our birds, as they are starting to search for a mate, they want to make sure everyone knows that they have claimed their spot. This tree in particular is theirs. No one else, with the exception of their mate and then their future chicks, is going to be welcome. And with all of that comes this cacophony of noise and posturing. And if you know where to look, it can also lead you to seeing kind of the softer side of the spring, of actually getting an opportunity to recognize what a fledged bird, a bird that's still in its first year of life, looks like compared to its parents. Getting the opportunity to see those food exchanges between parents and babies, and all of the different ways that they interact with each other or sometimes don't interact with each other as they try to survive. So we're going to be taking a look at a couple of different species that I think are especially interesting here. We're going to be looking at some of our migratory species that are really only up here for the spring and for the summer. Once they're done with that breeding season, they're going to be heading back down south again. And then some of our residential birds, so the birds that are here with us year round, the ones that are just as much of our neighbors as the folks that live next door. So I do want to really start us off by describing the things that we look for as birders to identify a fledgling or a first year bird, as they're sometimes called. And so there's a couple of things to look for. The first and most obvious of which is going to be begging behavior. And that can be really, really obvious. We're seeing a little bit of begging behavior in this picture here with these northern mockingbird chicks. But it's when they open their mouths and they start chirping, and it's very plaintive. It's very obvious that this is the noise a baby is making because it wants food. So they're not too dissimilar from us. Just as human babies will scream when they want feeding, so too will the baby birds. And it's never quite that really wonderfully enunciated songs or even the chirps that we're used to. It's usually something that's really short and stiff. Just because these are babies figuring out their voices. They don't know what they can do with their vocalizations yet. They are still learning. Another thing we look for is extra fluffy or loose feathers. And so we can see a little bit of this in our northern mockingbird fledglings here. As a bird, especially where its wings are going to press up against its body, if it looks like it's got feathers sticking out of the sides where those wings are pressed down, those are those loose feathers we're looking at. And we call them loose feathers because these birds are prone to shedding them. This first set of feathers that they develop as they're getting out of the nest after they've hatched from the egg, it only really has to last half of a season. They're kind of shoddy quality. You're going to notice that sometimes they have juvenile plumage, so they've got maybe some extra spots. Maybe they're brown and camouflaged. Maybe just the color isn't well defined. It's not bright. But these faded colorations or these unexpected spots are what allows this bird to blend in with the background a little bit better. And because our baby birds were putting so much of their energy into developing their entire skeletal and muscular and circulatory systems, they're doing a ton of growing in a very short amount of time. There wasn't much extra to spare for the feathers that they actually need to grow to fly from the nest. And so that's a good feature to look for. If you're looking at a bird and you're just like, it's a crow. I know it's a crow. I'm looking at a crow here, but it doesn't look quite right. Its feathers are dull. It's kind of shaggy looking. There's a good chance what you're looking at is a first year crow, a crow that was born just this spring. Another thing we keep an eye out for as birders, especially in the springtime, is going to be the gape of a bird. And this is essentially the bird's inside of its beak. Many birds have the inside of their mouths brightly colored. Some, you can look up some finches that have some absolutely wild patterns. It looks like they've got like worms and and like speckled eyes and stuff inside of their mouths. And all of that is basically painting a target that says, put caterpillars here. Um, and that's what the babies are going to be using. But these gapes, these colorful gapes, you can actually see at the edges of a bird's beak, and it looks like they kind of are sporting fat lips. And so some of the birds we're going to be talking about today in greater detail, I'm going to be pointing out those gapes and those juvenile plumages that we specifically look for. So there's all sorts of baby birds in the world. They're mostly divided into two different categories for us, the altricial and the precocial young. And the easiest one is the precocial young. It's precocious. These are things like ducklings and goslings, baby chickens. When they hatch out of the egg, they are fully feathered. Within about 24 hours, they are able to walk and feed themselves. They're really just depending on their parents to show them where the good places are to find food. But that takes a lot of energy. That's a really big egg, and you're relying on the strategy that basically I'm going to lay this one egg, and this egg is going to hatch. And I'm going to keep it protected and safe until then. But that's not always reliable. If I'm something like a sparrow, where I could maybe expect my nesting to be disrupted by crows or perhaps a feral house cat, then I don't necessarily want to be dumping all of that energy into these really large eggs. In which case, my strategy is going to be to produce altricial young. Babies, like in the bottom corner here, circling with my mouse, these are altricial young. And these chicks are actually a couple of days old. These are Western bluebird chicks. You can't really tell by looking at them, but the nest does give us a good clue. And these babies come out of their eggshells and they're breathing air, but it's going to be a couple of days before they're able to open their eyes and hold their heads up. When they're born, they're totally naked, they're totally helpless. And they're really going to be depending very strongly on their parents to keep them fed as they grow until they're ready to leave the nest. And so most of the babies we're going to be talking about are altricial today, because honestly, precocial young, there's really one strategy. You put all of your energy into this one large egg or this handful of large eggs, and then when that egg hatches, then you've got a fully formed baby that can actually follow you around and do things and exist as its own entity. But for our songbirds, they have to be a little bit more careful about things. So before we get into our families, it is springtime. We are naturalists. We are nature lovers. What to do if you find a baby bird? First off, you have to ask yourself, is the baby bird injured or sick? If it isn't, most cases you can leave it as it is. But this is a flowchart we use to determine what you should do if you do encounter a baby bird. Our office fields a lot of questions about baby birds, about fledglings, and about bird nests at this time of the year. And oftentimes what we see is people finding fledglings. So birds that have left the nest already, they're capable of flight. They're usually not good at it, but they can do it. Oftentimes they're actually feeding themselves independently. And they're independent of their parents at this point. Oftentimes people find them, and because they're clumsy babies that don't know well enough to be afraid of humans, they get picked up and scooped up and then taken to a wildlife hospital, when really all that needed to happen was maybe you move them off the sidewalk into a bush. So this is one of the ways that we make sure that the animals that are being taken to our wildlife centers in this area are the ones that really need care, rather than ones that are maybe just wandering a little bit astray from their parents. And something I always recommend people refresh themselves on with the spring season. But let's get talking about something more exciting, the actual birds. And so I wanted to start us off with the hooded oriole. And this is an absolutely gorgeous bird, as you can see. They're about the size of a scrub jay, but rather than being blue and gray, we've got this great yellowish orange and black. And the way I remember that the hooded oriole, because we have multiple types of orioles, but the way I remember that the hooded oriole looks like this rather than having the eye stripe and the black cap that our Bullock's oriole has, is it's wearing an orange hoodie. Your way of remembering which bird is which, totally up to you, but that's the trick that I use. And the reason that I find these birds so fascinating when it comes to their families is this is actually a bird whose range we're seeing actually expand. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the general state of the birds in the world. Like most of our other species of animals, they are unfortunately in decline. And a great deal of that is due to habitat loss and degradation. So when the habitat still kind of exists, but maybe it's not capable of providing as much food as is necessary, or maybe the nesting opportunities have been really impacted. That's what we consider habitat degradation. But the hooded oriole is a very picky nester. And these guys, these southern birds with their bright colors, this is their range map. So the orange is where they breed, the purple is where they're year round, the blue is where they spend the winters, and then that yellow portion in the middle of central Mexico is the area that they traverse during their migratory season. So between that breeding season and the wintering season. These birds love palm trees. And as you can imagine, the natural range of the palm tree doesn't really extend very far north. But people certainly do. And it turns out that we just love putting palm trees into our neighborhoods for a reason I haven't actually figured out yet. But the cool thing about this is it means that these birds, with their very particular desires and needs for their nests, have actually seen their range expand. And so we're actually going to see them go through their migration. And this is a map that's put together by the Cornell Lab. And if you are a part of the eBird community, if you've ever submitted a bird list through Merlin or eBird on your phone or online, you have actually contributed to the data that goes into producing these animations. So if you have ever submitted a bird list, you have contributed to these things, which is always a really fun part of community science, is seeing your data be put into use. So we start off in January, and then as the months warm up, we get to see them span north. They don't fully extend throughout the state of California. I'm going to play this again just so you can watch the parts of California that light up. We've got the Southern California coast, and then we've got the Bay Area, which is where we see a lot of those palm trees being planted. And I really encourage folks in the summertime, take a walk around your neighborhood, take a look at your palm trees, and if you've got a really annoying bird that is bright yellow, congratulations, you have hooded orioles. And this is the sort of nest we're looking for. It is woven onto the underside of these fan palms. And it just kind of clings there. And they weave it out of strips of the palm fronds and the little threads that they're pulling from the bark of the palm trees themselves. So it's quite well hidden. And unless you actually see the birds, the male being more brightly colored, they're very easy to miss because they're literally stashed away, hidden underneath these gigantic leaves. And here's another view of our hooded orioles because they do stick together as a family for about a month or two before the parents will work their way back south. Um, the parents don't actually stick around for their offspring to be ready to migrate south. Once they have raised that baby and they've shown it some of the good places to find food, so they've figured out where all of the neighborhood hummingbird feeders are. They've found all of the orange and the other fruit trees that they can raid because these birds absolutely adore sugar. In fact, you can actually attract them to your yard by putting out jam. You'll get ants too, but the birds will eat those as well. But the bird on the right-hand side here, without any markings of black on her, this is what the female looks like. She's a pretty strong lemon yellow. She's going to be the exact same size as the male, but she's a little bit less distinctive. But beside her is our juvenile. And this little guy, and it is a male, because we can see that little chin patch starting. You can see it's got the start of the adult plumage, but those colors aren't nearly as strong as what we were seeing with the adult male. Its beak is still kind of pale. Its legs are pale even. And there's a little bit of paleness sticking out right at the corner. And that's the remnants of this little bird's gape that we look for, that swollen and colorful flesh that basically says caterpillars. They go right here. And so what's interesting with these birds is once the parents are done raising their offspring, they're like, yes, they flew off on their own. They are feeding themselves. They just fly straight south. They are done with California. They want to go back down to Mexico where there are fewer predators, where the weather is a little bit nicer, and where there's even more fruit available. And so that leaves these offspring to stick around for a couple of months. They'll weather out the rest of the summer, building their strength by eating lots of fruits, but also a lot of insects. You need protein to build protein, and they're looking to build their flight muscles before they embark on what's going to be several days worth of flying. And once they are fully grown, they've bulked up their muscle mass, they've built up some fat reserves to keep them flying while they're on the move, and they've fully grown in all of their feathers. That's when the juveniles will make their way south down back into Mexico. And the really interesting thing is they're going to be doing that in fall. And that coincides very nicely with our fall migration, which is when we see most of our vagrancies, when we see our young first-year birds who have never migrated. They've never flown these long distances before. They're working solely off of instincts and whatever clues they can get from older birds as to what direction to go in. Maybe they're navigating by the stars or they're using magnetic sensitive cells in their brain to help orient themselves. But they're going to fly their way south until they see a habitat that looks like it can do them justice. So there's going to be palm trees. There's going to be lots of fruit available for them to eat. And they're going to gorge themselves through the whole winter. And if they're lucky enough, they'll get to go north to breed again in the next year. So that's a really wonderful and colorful and noisy, so noisy. They're similar in jays in both size and vocalizations. So if you're hearing a bunch of chattering, check out your local palm trees. spend a couple of minutes just standing at the base of them. And odds are pretty good you're gonna spot these hooded orioles. Next bird I want to talk about is significantly smaller. This is the Anna's hummingbird. So she's 4 inches in wingspan, maybe. She weighs about the same as 2 pennies. If you could fit her in an envelope, it would just take one stamp to mail her. Well, then you've got a very angry hummingbird on your hands, and that's your own problem. But these are birds that have a very, very definitive split between the males and the females. And we're familiar with dimorphism in animals across the animal kingdom, right? We know males and female lions, we know how to tell them apart. We're very familiar with female ducks being camouflaged and much less colorful than the male ducks, and all of that. And with our hummingbirds, that color difference and that behavior difference is definitely there, but it's even more pronounced when it comes to who's taking care of the babies. Because with an Anna's hummingbird, the male will do a lot of work to attract the female's attention. He's going to find a nice perch where he's going to sing his little heart out. And once he sees that he's attracted a couple of females' attentions, he's going to fly way up into the sky. And then he's going to do some pretty acrobatic dives where he just folds his wings in and he snaps his tail open and it makes a really loud, piercing pop because of the air displacement. He's moving so quickly. And that's followed by 4 seconds of coitus. Now, after that, the female is on her own, and she's going to be putting all of her energy into building a nest and raising those babies because he has gone off to find another female to mate with. So this is a bird where all of the parental care, all of the nest building, all of the incubation of the eggs, and all of the rearing of the chicks is done by the female. The male has nothing to do with it. Once coitus has occurred, he's done. And one of the really neat things about these little hummingbirds, they're year-round for us. As you can see looking at this map, it's not really a migratory species to speak of, is that these little guys breed about 11 months out of the year. So, unlike most birds where they've got a very well-defined breeding season, you're like, okay, I know that through the months of March to June, I'm going to see some hooded orioles. They're going to be building nests. They're going to be looking for mates. They're going to be raising babies. If I go outside on a day that ends with a Y, there are going to be hummingbirds that are mating, that are courting, that are raising babies. So it is not uncommon to find hummingbird nests in the middle of winter. They're not doing anything wrong by their standards. And a good portion of why they're able to get away with this nonsense of these tiny little birds that weigh the same as 2 pennies. The way they're able to manage that is they have a very, very fast turnaround between the fertilization of eggs and the fledging of the young. So here is a female on her nest. There is a liquid amber seed pod. When I was a kid, we called them pricker balls because we'd just throw them at each other in the neighborhoods. But if you've got liquid amber trees, you are very familiar with the size and shape of those seed pods. So this is a very tiny nest. And as you can see, when she's sitting on it, I mean, she practically disappears. She's not super colorful. She's not going to be singing. So the easiest way to find a hummingbird nest is to find a female and then watch her return to whatever tree or bush she returns to from her trip to a flower or a hummingbird feeder. You really do have to put in the work to follow these birds if you want to find their nests because they're absolutely tiny. And once you find a nest, you've got a very short window of time in which to observe it because it only takes her Just a couple of days to put this nest together out of plant materials like moss, sometimes the fluff of cottonwood trees or from sycamores, um, any shredded leaf material or grasses, and then she holds it all together with spider webs, with cobwebs that she's found. She'll gather them up with her beak, and then she'll use that strong, sticky material to hold her nest together. And if you're looking at this nest and you're thinking to yourself, that seems like a tiny nest even for this tiny little bird, you're right. By the time the babies hatch, the nests are usually unable to be reused because the babies are practically bursting from the seams of it. So here's a pair of chicks. You can see they're practically falling out of their nest. But even with our hummingbirds, you can see that brightly colored gape that we talked about earlier. Oh goodness, I have stopped my sharing. I am so sorry. Let me pop us back in there. So even though we're looking at hummingbirds, we're looking at birds that are really well known for feeding on flowers directly. They still have this bright, colorful gape, and that's because as chicks, they need to be fed bugs. They need to eat something that's a little bit more nutritious, that gives them some more calories than just the nectar that they'll subsist on as adults. And by the time they leave this nest, mom is done with them. She's not going to be spending any time with them to show them where the flowers are. They're going to be completely independent, and she's going to go off and live her own life for a month or two, and then she's going to restart this cycle all over again. And if you've ever wondered what mating hummingbirds look like, in our bottom right-hand corner here, that's the posture you're looking for. It only lasts like 4 seconds, so gotta be fast to recognize it. Now, with our next bird, or rather, I do want to talk a little bit about the abundance of these birds. And this is another bird, or rather, this is a bird that's actually seeing its abundance increase. So the general trend with our bird species is that we are seeing their abundance, their populations drop. And a lot of this is tied to the die-offs that we're seeing with bugs. It's tied to climate change. It's also tied to habitat destruction. And the reason why our Anna's hummingbird is actually seeing its abundance increase is actually because they're quite well suited to existing in an urban habitat. Our propensity for flowers in our gardens year round, the fondness we have for the weird plants of Australia, that actually helps keep this species going. That has allowed them to take advantage of these new resources that they are making available to them. And a nice thing about this bird is that as far as hummingbirds go, and Anna's hummingbird is a generalist, as much as any hummingbird can be. They don't have this ridiculously long beak like some of our hummingbirds in Costa Rica or South America have, where they have to find these massive flowers that are like twice the bird's body length, and have to have that super long beak to get access to the nectar. Our native plants around here are fairly small in size, and that has given the Anna's hummingbird this relatively short but incredibly useful beak in accessing flowers, not just from here in California, but flowers that are coming from all over the world. And that's really given these little guys an edge over some of their more specialized and more sensitive to human disturbance species. So it's not all bad news. Some of the birds are thriving. This next one is a bird that has caused problems for cities, for bridges. These are the barn swallows. And they earn that name because they have a habit of nesting in and on human structures. So this is another one of our migratory birds. Like the hooded oriole, it's going to be visiting us in the spring and the summer. It's going to raise its babies here. And then once those babies have fledged, they're going to say goodbye. They don't want to deal with our winters. And they're going to fly back south. And these swallows, these are all adults. And what they're doing is not just landing because they felt like they wanted to take a walk. Swallows have incredibly useless little legs. They're too short to really hold their body up properly, and they can't actually take a proper step. Um, their legs are so short. But what they're doing is they're gathering mud, and they're going to use that mud to form this wonderful little shelf that's hidden away on a cliffside, or more frequently on the side of a building near the roof or underneath a boardwalk, places like that. And that's where they're going to stash away their eggs and their chicks. And here we have an altricial, a baby nestling that is being fed. It looks like a bee of some sort. So that diet, completely insect based. And you can see as our altricial young, as our songbird babies are growing, they get hit by the ugly stick really, really hard. And they do eventually turn into those adults that we marvel at and that we think are so gorgeous. But there's definitely a couple of weeks in this period where they are covered with itchy pin feathers, and they look pretty darn terrible, if I'm being honest. But here's some older fledglings. These ones have left the nest, obviously. And you can see some of those signs of first-year birds that I mentioned earlier. We've got that fat yellow lip going on at the edge of the beak, the gape of these birds. Where the body feathers meet the wings, you can see the feathers are kind of puffed out. They're loose, they're extra fluffy. And they need to be to retain this little guy's body heat because they haven't built up the fat reserves an adult has to keep them warm. And there's also another very key thing that you will see if you are out at the Palo Alto Baylands or Shoreline Lake and you're seeing these birds zip through the air, and that is the begging behavior. Don Edwards is also a really lovely place to spot these little guys. That begging behavior. They sit perched out, lined up for mom and dad, and they just open those beaks and they start chirping. And the parents will literally fly by and pass off the bugs, the mosquitoes, the gnats, the bees that they are catching. They'll just pass these food items to the babies so the babies can learn, okay, this is something that I am going to look to catch as an adult. When I'm flying on my own, when I'm able to do those maneuvers myself, this is what I'm going to be looking for to catch. And it can be a really fun way to spend the morning, is watching all of these baby birds beg and be fed by their parents. And you don't have to go far at all to find them. So the barn swallow is a little bit more widely distributed. This is a bird that's found all across the globe. And so getting to watch this bird's migration cycle is a little bit more exciting. So we're starting in January. And by the time we hit June, they are almost all in the Northern Hemisphere. And they float down. And the interesting thing with this migration is they're not so much avoiding cold weather or ice. What they're trying to avoid is rain, because these are birds that hunt on the wing. And I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but there's not a ton of flying insects bothering you when it's raining out and you take a walk outside. It's fine for the adults to skip a day or two of not eating if there's a rain, but those chicks cannot go without food as they are growing. In fact, they need to be fed every 20 or 30 minutes, or they will stop growing. They will die. And so these birds, these barn swallows, need to make sure that they are going to be in a dry area as they are raising their chicks. And one of the things that we're seeing now, particularly with climate change, and the strange weather patterns that happen, or rather the breaks in normal weather patterns, is we're seeing these unseasonable storms pop up. And unfortunately, they can have a really large negative impact on our breeding populations of birds, just because these babies are so vulnerable to interruptions in their feeding and their growth. So watch that one more time. We're going to avoid the rains, go up where it's nice and dry, where there's lots of bugs, and then we're going to descend back down into the southern hemisphere. And here we've got another abundance map. Unfortunately, unlike our Anna's hummingbird, you can see that the general trend is decreasing. And a lot of this has to do with that climate change I mentioned, but it also has to do with the staggering numbers of bugs that we are seeing die off. And so Marav could definitely speak to this with greater information. But it really is incredibly important to support bug life, whether that is through your gardening, or you've simply decided that you're not going to make use of pesticides or things like that around your home. Bugs, even things as small and insignificant as mosquitoes or gnats, they are forming the base of our food pyramid. Without them, we don't have the swallows, and without the swallows, we don't have some of the larger birds like the falcons. So all of this incredible tree of life, all of this kind of depends on this really strong base of insect life. And so protecting that is incredibly important for the survival of pretty much all of the other species on this lovely blue and green planet of ours. Now, we do have to go a little bit weird because we are in the Bay Area. So we're going to be talking about a very interesting family structure here with our acorn woodpeckers. Now, these birds are pretty recognizable if you have hiked in our hills, if you have been in any of our oak savanna or oak forests, you probably run into these guys. You've heard their kind of laughing call that wah, 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 that they seesaw back and forth through the trees. Our acorn woodpeckers are weird. They're very weird. Most woodpeckers are solitary animals. They'll come together for breeding season and then they'll disperse back into the forest. Because, you know, if you're a woodpecker, there's only so many bugs underneath the tree bark that you can find. You don't necessarily want to share that with a bunch of people. But the acorn woodpecker has decided that the more the merrier. They're going to stay in their family groups for their entire lives. And the way they get away with this is they create these stashes, these stores of food. So this acorn woodpecker is actually seated on a granary. Now, we often see our granaries in dead trees or dead tree branches. These are pieces of wood that have been riddled, absolutely riddled with holes. And each of those holes is now home to an acorn. And the cool thing with acorn woodpeckers is, in addition to being non-migratory and having a pretty limited range, is that when these guys get together, they are going to be throwing a party. And it's never just one. It's the whole family. It's all the cousins. And they're all going to get together and support each other when it comes time to raising those babies. Now, if you're familiar at all with woodpeckers, you know that rather than risking a nest out in the open, on the ground, or putting a nest precariously balanced in the branches of a tree. They figured out a much safer strategy. They're just going to drill a hole into that tree and then build the nest inside. And the great advantage to that is it's much harder for those nests to be discovered by predators. And even if those predators do discover those nests, and when I'm talking about predators, I'm talking everything from snakes to raccoons, jays and crows and other birds. Spring is a smorgasbord for any sort of animal you choose to name. When there's lots of life happening, when there's lots of breeding, when there's lots of babies, that's a lot of easy food opportunities. And eggs, bird eggs, are one of the best opportunities in the animal kingdom. So they have to be very careful about protecting their nests. The disadvantage of this is obviously you have to dig that hole into the side of the tree. Luckily for the acorn woodpeckers, they've got all the adaptations they need for that. They've got a really strong, stiff tail that they use to create leverage, to hammer their head into the bark of trees. They've got an incredibly sharp, strong beak. Their neck muscles are absolutely massive. I band birds in my free time, and the woodpeckers are always the ones that I end up bleeding from, because they hammer away at your fingers, which feels very fair in that situation. So they've got the nest construction on lock, and in fact, they're so good at it that there are dozens of other species of birds that rely on woodpeckers to build their nests for them. Things like chestnut-backed chickadees or white-breasted nuthatch. Those are what we call secondary cavity nesters. So once the woodpeckers are done with that hole, they're going to move in and make use of that nesting space. Now, as we mentioned before, not a migratory species. So what does our abundance map do? It does nothing. It does not move because these guys, they're going to stick in one spot for the entire year. But when it comes time to breeding and raising those chicks, which you can see begging for food in their little cavities, the acorn woodpecker decides the entire family is involved. Now, there can be multiple breeding pairs within a family of acorn woodpeckers. I think the most documented in a colony was 3 breeding females and then 7 breeding males. So you can figure out that messy math on yourself, but extra pair matings are very much the norm for birds. And what they'll do is when they have multiple breeding pairs, they actually form one single nest. And the way that they do that is they are going to wait until all of the females that are involved in this have begun laying eggs. And the reason that they want to make sure that they're all laying eggs at the same time is if you lay an egg a week before everybody else and you've started incubating that egg is going to hatch a week before any of those other chicks are. So they are very particular about the timing when those eggs are incubated, when they're sat on, so that they can begin to develop. And all of the partners, so in our example of 3 breeding females and then 7 breeding males, all of those adults are involved with the protection of that nest. There's always going to be at least 1 or 2 of them hanging around the nest site, keeping an eye out for predators. The rest of them are going to be going out and gathering food, or maybe guarding their granary. And what this does is this forms this really strong family bond where they are not just being supported by other adults, but they're learning that this is a normal part of their existence, that this social behavior, these interactions, which are so rare with the rest of the woodpeckers, and even the rest of the birds in general, this is where that really builds. And it really has given the acorn woodpeckers this wonderful advantage and security of always having a babysitter available, of always having somebody who can watch the fridge and make sure that those pesky crows or those jays are not going to be able to abscond with those acorns that they've stashed away. They're not going to be disappearing with the food that the family is relying on. And in addition to that, it also makes these birds super easy to find. So if you're taking a walk out at Henry Coe, or really any other open space, Rancho San Antonio, Rancho San Vicente, areas like that in our hills, that is where you're going to be finding these birds. So you listen for that whacka 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 call, and you look for the holes in the trees because oftentimes those are in trees that have been dead for decades. They're pretty darn easy to spot. And then you can find yourself privy to all of these family dramas because there's still dramas. There's still babies being clumsy. There's still, one of those cousins is super annoying. Maybe your sister like pulled your tail feather or something like that. There's all of those dramas are still there. It's just happening with these black and white and red birds. And here's how you usually see them. All lined up together, males and females, out in the open because they're quite large. And they'll just spend a day together, which is a really special treat because, as I mentioned before, most of the time when you see a woodpecker, you see a woodpecker on its own. So it can be really fun to see these birds hanging out socially and just being out in the open like this. Now, I do have to mention crows because I love them. And also, they're the one bird that everyone in the world seems to have experience with. I do a lot of programs with elementary school students, and even them, whether I am talking to preschoolers or fifth graders, they all know what a crow is. And the crow is an interesting bird because of how social it is. We see birds with these really interesting social groups, like the acorn woodpecker, like the American crow. We see that they actually have a pretty distinct advantage when it comes to survival, especially in complex habitats like our urban environments, where there's lots of dangers to look out for, whether it's coming from humans or the things that we build and create, like cars or glass buildings, where we fragmented the natural habitat. So it's in just bits and pieces, where maybe the best available food isn't something that most wild animals would recognize as food. I'm sure you're all familiar with the propensity of crows to eat whatever they can find. And that really is an advantage. Being a generalist in these complicated habitats is really an advantage for these birds. But the American crow, when it comes time to raise its family, is kind of adorable. I know they're not everybody's favorite birds, but I'd like to convince you otherwise. So this handsome fellow is an American crow. We take a look at it, shiny feathers, super sleek throat. We look at that beak and it's a normal looking beak instead of some giant thing like our ravens are sporting. But this is a bird for whom family is incredibly important. So your average crow can live from like 8 to 10 years, which is a pretty decent lifespan for a wild animal. But it's actually been found that crows will spend up to 5 years with their families before going off and forming their own. So what are they doing in all of that time? Well, it turns out here's a baby crow compared to an adult crow, just so you can see the difference between a nice, sleek adult and a very scruffy looking baby. And what this picture doesn't quite show is that crow chicks, when they are still in the nest, actually have blue eyes, which is is always a cute little feature. But it turns out that these chicks from previous years will stay with their parents, and they'll actually help them raise the current year's chicks. They'll help protect the nest. They will help teach that baby, this year's baby, crow, the skills it needs to survive. So not just how to fly properly, but also how to fly so you can properly harass a hawk or an owl. Um, what our alarm calls are if we spot a coyote versus that really cranky human that sprays the hose at us down the street. They learn how to do things like open up trash cans or, the sandwiches taste better if you soak them in the bird bath, which is an unfortunate trick that the crows that live at McClellan have learned, much to our continuing distress. And they're not just acting as caretakers, though. They do their own exploration. If you are familiar with migration, or you live in Sunnyvale, you're probably familiar with the winter flocks of crows. They get together, they socialize in flocks, hundreds strong. These absolutely massive flocks that they just socialize in. They get to know each other. And then once spring comes, they will separate back into their family units. But it turns out that some of these chicks from previous years, while they will come back and assist with raising the chicks, they'll also range out and visit neighboring families. They'll do their own exploration. They're having their own study abroad experience before they come back in, check in with the parents, and then continue on with their explorations. And our crows are actually, they're starting to trend downwards in abundance. And this is despite the fact that they are these generalists that are incredibly social, and incredibly clever, that have these problem-solving abilities, the ability to recognize the faces of dangerous people, communicate those dangers to each other, their habits of flocking together, so that there's always somebody looking out for predators or danger. And a good portion of this comes down to the collapse of the lower portions of their food web. Crows are great at surviving on garbage, surviving on the scraps of food that we as humans leave behind. But they naturally prefer things like eggs, things like small lizards, fruits that they can steal off of trees. And as those decrease, we do see our crows decrease as well. And unfortunately, they're also susceptible to diseases like the West Nile virus, which we all get to be reminded of late in the summers around here. That's a disease that strikes the corvids, the crows and jays and ravens particularly hard. But they can also be hit by things like our bird flu, which is currently going around. So despite the fact that they are these largely successful urban birds that get along pretty darn well with humans, we are still seeing their abundance decrease. And it has a lot to do with the food webs surrounding them, rather than a direct impact to this particular species. So here's another very handsome, fully adult crow exploring some interesting foods it's finding on the beach. Another benefit for crows and their gigantic brains is they do have some tool usage. So they will use sticks to pry food out of places that they can't quite reach. They will drop things like walnuts or mussels in roadways and let cars crack them open, so that they can get to the food inside. And if you've never taken a moment to observe your local crows, I do recommend giving it a chance, especially at this time of the year. this is when the crows really pull out that complicated vocabulary um, that they kind of put claim to the rest of the year. Most of the time we hear crows and they're cawing and it's that harsh, ugly sound. But this is the time of year where you will hear them purr at each other, really deep in their throat. It's a um, you'll hear them do weird little mimicries of other birds. So you'll hear like an extra squeaky red-shouldered hawk, and it's a young crow practicing its mimicry. Um, and the springtime's a wonderful, wonderful time to be introduced to all of those little variations. And as we move on to our Q&A, I do have to do one final dishonorable mention to the bird that does not raise its own chicks, but instead foists them off on other birds. That's our brown-headed cowbird. They're nest parasites. So what they do is they find a nest, usually on the edge of a habitat where it's a little bit more exposed. They'll lay their egg in that nest, and then a bird like the dark-eyed junco or the house finch then ends up raising a baby that's twice its size and is always hungry, but it was born out of their nest and they're gonna raise it. Um, the ongoing mystery we have in the bird world is, how do cowbirds recognize other cowbirds, and instead of just mating with the birds their parents look like. But that is its own mystery and probably would warrant its own deep dive talk. So I believe we've got some Q&A time now.
Janet asked, what's the difference between crows and ravens?
Yeah. So they are, genetically speaking, cousins. But our crows are much more social. With ravens, you'll see them hanging out with their mate in pairs, but they don't like to gather in these large family groups like we see gathering with crows. They tend to, once their chicks are adults, they're gonna chase off their chicks, because that is the pair's established territory. They're not going to give it up even for their own kids. So they're going to chase their offspring off, and those offspring are then going to establish their own territories. Whereas with the crows, you have them sticking around for multiple years. So we see a lot more socialization with the crows. We also tend to see crows in more urban environments rather than the more of the open spaces that the ravens seem to prefer. Now, you will occasionally get large numbers of ravens gathering, but that's when there is a glut of food available. So that is when a field has been freshly rained on and there's worms squirming up by the hundreds. Or if you go to a landfill, landfills are great for ravens. So it has to be really, really good conditions for them to willingly share space in large numbers. But just visually, the raven's about twice the size of a crow. So even if you're looking at a crow and you're like, that's a really big crow, I promise you the raven's bigger. Also, crows are really sleek. The feathers are nice and shiny, and ravens are too, but they've got this shaggy ruff. It's almost like a mane around their neck of feathers that are especially long and that stick out whenever the raven vocalizes. And when it does vocalize, out of this absolutely gargantuan beak that is its entire face. Remember, I mentioned how wonderfully proportional and sleek the crow's beak was in comparison to its head. Crow's caw, ravens croak. It's deeper, it's rougher. It's a crow with laryngitis. And then on top of that, there's some differences in how they fly, and also the shape of their tails. But those are kind of the more useful field marks to look for. A raven's going to have a point to its tail, whereas a crow is going to have an even fan. All of its tail feathers are the same length. Whereas the central tail feathers of a raven are going to be a little bit longer, and so they extend into that point.
I wanted to call out a couple of things during the presentation. Craig Gleason says, we need to express the weight of hummingbirds in dimes now since the penny has been abolished. So, how many dimes would a hummingbird weigh?
Well, I don't have the weight conversions, but I would say it's probably around 3 or 4. So a little bit more, but still, single forever stamp. And an incredibly angry hummingbird.
And I want you were talking about babies a lot. And
Yeah,
I have a question for you. What is your favorite baby bird? I know you like the corvid family, but
we like the
what is
corvid.
your favorite?
My favorite baby bird is the Buick's wren. Um, because they have the exact same attitude that the adults have. So they're just gonna get out and scream at you, which I find absolutely delightful coming from an animal I could fit in my pocket. Um, but when they fledge and they leave the nest, they've got all of the feathers on their body and their wings are mostly grown in, but their tail feathers are just these itsy bitsy, like centimeter long nubs. And so they'll spend the first couple of days out of their nest just hopping around outside. Because if they don't have that tail, they can't really steer themselves when they fly. So you'll just see these little brown, like ping pong balls just hopping around in the bushes, chasing after bugs and spiders. And it's absolutely adorable. Um, and especially when it's paired with that attitude that the adults bring, which is just I'm gonna fight whatever I feel like.
Well, one of the things that Kelly brought up is that her neighborhood crows follow a neighbor on her walks because she always has bird seed in her pockets and they know she will feed them. Can you talk a little bit more about the intelligence of crows and the corvids? I remember reading an article about forgiveness and that they really don't. They have a very long memory.
Yeah, they hold grudges like nobody's business. They're like your mother-in-law like that. Crows recognize human faces. We know this because there was a study done by University of Washington a decade plus back. Um, and what they did, oh my gosh. So Sam just dropped a picture of a baby Buick's-wren in the chat. I do recommend you taking a look at that. Thank you, Sam. Um, but they did this by having people wear masks. There was two masks. There was an ugly, scary mask that chased the crows around and made lots of loud noises. And then there was a friendly mask that gave the crows, I think it was like peanuts or something. And then the way they tested the facial recognition is they had undergrads walk across the UW campus while wearing these masks. And the friendly masks got followed by some very polite crows that were very interested in the progress of the friendly masked person. Um, but the mean masked people got mobbed. Um, and then they repeated this experiment several years later. And not only did the crows remember, but they had apparently communicated this description of this scary person to their offspring because it wasn't just the adult crows doing this, it was all of their babies. So there was this whole murder, which is what we call a flock of crows because we are overly dramatic in the bird world. Um, just following these poor undergrads as they tried to just walk across campus. Um, it is, yeah. And they remember that. I always recommend trying to make nice with your neighborhood crows, or at least don't make an enemy out of them. So like don't spray them with the hose. Don't try and chase them off too aggressively, because they will remember you. And it's one thing to have crows bring you gifts, which they will do if they think you're a good source of food. They like to collect shiny objects. They'll bring them to you, um, which is absolutely adorable. But they very much recognize people's faces. And a couple of years back, we actually had a gentleman call into the office, and he unfortunately had the misfortune of picking up an injured crow. and having to take it to the wildlife center. But as far as the flock in his neighborhood knew, he took Fred, and Fred is not back. And so this poor guy had to change his jogging route to outside of his neighborhood because every time he stepped out of his house, he was followed by these angry crows. Um, and they did eventually disperse, and we haven't heard back from him at least. So I hope that means the situation is resolved. But um, yeah, it's amazing what they'll remember.
Carolyn, there was another question for you. Any tips on attracting oak titmouse? I've only seen one in my yard, and Marav said that they sometimes come to her bird feeder that has sunflower seeds. Do you have
Yeah.
any other tips?
Yeah, they like sunflowers. They also like peanuts, but honestly, I'd be hard pressed to find a bird that didn't. They will come to suet feeders, but sometimes those can be a little bit, they can take the birds a little bit of time to find and discover that they're food. Um, Oak titmice are cavity nesting birds. So if you put up a bird box, you may find them visiting your yard to use that box. Also, because they're cavity nesters, they will make use of old woodpecker holes, or if you've got an old tree that's maybe dropped some limbs and some natural holes have formed in it. Um, and that's what they're looking for, at least in terms of food and shelter. um in terms of water, having just a shallow saucer will bring in a lot of wildlife, including the birds, like the oak titmouse. And then like the name implies, they do love oak trees. So if you're in a neighborhood that doesn't have any oak trees, unfortunately, you are kind of out of luck. But those other factors, if you do have oak trees in your neighborhood, or at least in the general area, those are things that you can do to hopefully increase how attractive your yard is to them. Oh, my second favorite baby bird is a California gull. Um, they're precocial young. They are super fluffy. They're little cookies and cream, so like pale grayish with black spots. Um, they're just the cutest darn things. And then their biggest predator is actually adult California gulls. So we've got breeding colonies of these birds out in the salt ponds in the San Francisco Bay. Um, Thousands of them. And there's an annual gull survey that San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory runs. And it's a special, joyous occasion where we get into kayaks and we trudge across the salt ponds and we get pooped on by gulls and they try to knock us off the levees while we count their eggs. Really great time. Um, if you are a person who enjoys being attacked by wildlife for perfectly reasonable reasons, I do strongly recommend it. I also strongly recommend bringing a change of clothes or at least a towel to sit on because your car doesn't deserve that. Um, but yeah, second favorite baby bird, California gull.
Well, thanks for that,
And you
especially the
forgot to ask me
advertisement.
what's my favorite, Deb.
Oh, yes. What is your
So my
favorite bird?
favorite is the coot because the babies are just so weird.
They're
And
so
we are
big.
sometimes lucky to coordinate a spring visit to Hellier Park with the baby coots. So a coot, no, American coot, right?
Mhm.
The American coot is this black bird that lives in ponds and creeks, and you might think it's a duck, but it's not. Anyway, the parent bird is kind of black and, probably won't look back at it, but the baby coot is this bizarre little creature with a bald red head with just little tiny red feathers. And yeah, they're just something else. And you can actually see them because it's a common bird. So
Mhm. And those parents get incredibly aggressive with their child rearing. So if they have a coot chick that's kind of not up to par, it's not making its age level standards with the rest of its siblings, the parents will actually kill the chick. So it's not all fun and games in bird families. Fratricide and infanticide are pretty regular things. Um, with coots, though, it is especially brutal. Uh, but yeah, so it's an interesting play of you get all of this wonderful hope and new life, and at the same time there's very much that brutality of nature that's still ever present. Um,
Even
which
the adult coats are not very kind to each other.
no, they're
Like,
not.
yeah,
I mean,
pretty scary.
yeah. So to my knowledge, there hasn't been any specific studies around those storms, but barn swallows are fairly closely monitored just by birders. And one thing that we've noticed with other swallows, so they're related cousins, violet green swallows, and tree swallows, which have that same dependency on dry weather in order to hunt. Um, we do see these correlations of nesting crashes with these atmospheric rivers, and the ones we've been having recently aren't such a big deal because it's still really early in the nesting season. So if the parents get a couple of really cold, rainy, wet days where they can't hunt, maybe mom's going to lay off on laying some eggs. She'll hold off on incubating them. Or if there are chicks, it's really early in the season, there's still an opportunity for them to have some more to try again. The real damage happens when we get these atmospheric rivers in like late April or May, when there's already chicks that have hatched in the nest, when the parents have already sunk a bunch of time and resources into raising those chicks and protecting that nest. And that's when a disruption to the nesting can have a really noticeable impact on the population. Because it's also worth mentioning, it's like a 70 to 80% mortality rate for first year birds. Every adult bird that you see is its own little miracle of survival. Um, so birds breed with the expectation that a lot of those fledglings are going to die. And so if you don't have that replacement population coming up each year, you very quickly see the populations drop off. And this is something that unfortunately we've got a lot of experience with seeing at this point.
We are viewing a large drop in insect populations worldwide in North America and in Europe. And this is probably, as Colin mentioned, one of the reasons why we're watching also a decline in bird populations. What I can share is that we know that, sorry about the noise, we know that many birds, if not most birds, need to feed their little babies, the ugly and the pretty ones, with bugs. So many of our songbirds, for example, even if they come to our feeders, that's, some nice seeds for the adults, but to feed their babies, they actually depend on caterpillars, and those come from moth and butterflies. And those, in turn, depend on having native plants in general. I mean, we can have caterpillars on non-native plants, but usually those are just not here because we brought the plants and we tried not to bring their pests with them. But those little pests are actually bird food. So most of the plants you plant in your yard, unless you plant native, didn't come from here, which means that the natural predators, all sorts of caterpillars, are not here either, so that they can provide food for anything. And once you plant native plants, then you provide food for caterpillars, which then are food for baby birds. So if you want to help our bird populations, this is one thing you could do. And even if you live in an apartment and you just plant, a couple of plants on your balcony, that's something, because if we all plant natives, then we could make a difference. And we're going to start a new study with CNPS, with the Native Plant Society, to see just how much our native plant gardens support insect populations and bird populations in the Bay Area. So I think this would be really interesting. And then I will have some data to share.
Very cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, I live in an apartment, and so all of my plants are in little pots and containers, but I do have a sticky monkey flower bush that is absolutely thriving, and it's bringing in the hummingbirds, which my cat is absolutely ecstatic about. I've unlocked a new channel of cat TV for him, um, just with this one little plant.
So I have a bunch of hummingbird sage from Deb, and they are doing so well in my San Jose yard now. That I have a hummingbird. I don't know if there's more than one individual, but there's a hummingbird who decided this is his territory, and nobody else get close to his area, which is now my patio and front yard. And yeah, he goes from one plant to the other. So, you could put a hummingbird feeder, but you could also just plant the favorite food
Yeah.
that will provide lots of food, and then you don't need to clean the feeder, which is a big plus,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, that's a really great trade-off if you're trying to decide, am I going to put up a feeder or am I going to plant some native plants? Less upkeep with the native plants, and you don't have to worry about rats or squirrels being attracted to your feeder. Those native plants can really be a good way to go.
Yeah, and by the way, you never know what kind of interesting insects you might find on your native plants. So I sometimes share some observations I take in my yard, and I recently uploaded an observation of a leaf miner. It's a little insect that lives between the two layers of the leaf. So you basically don't really see the insect, but you see the little scribble that it lives on the leaf. And I took a photo of one I saw in my yard. It's really the least interesting photo you could take, but I uploaded that with a note about the host plant because I knew what it was. And the leaf miner expert, so leaf miners are either moth or fly larvae. And the expert in North America who wrote a 1,200-page book about them uh, comment on iNaturalist saying that this is the first time a leaf miner was documented on that plant species. So you could do that when you look at things that most people just ignore, like a leaf miner. So just by planting some native plants, you might discover cool stuff.
Yeah, and I think that really kind of highlights what's really cool about community science is having so many eyes looking for the same sort of thing or just looking in general. We're really able to leverage the community's enthusiasm and enjoyment for this to really accomplish some pretty amazing surveys of our areas. Um, that's one of the reasons the BioBlitzes are so fun, because it would take an entire grants funding to organize that many people to get out and join a study like that. So I see Craig's got a question about updating street tree lists. I don't have any specific resources beyond there's a local chapter, Santa Clara Valley California Native Plant Society, which would probably have some resources to share for you with that, or also grassroots ecology would be a good resource. Certainly, if we could get the street trees to all be natives, that would really open up a lot of habitat and make our urban spaces more usable. Yeah, thanks for dropping that link, Deb. More usable for all of our wildlife. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing to have tre trees, like oak trees lining our neighborhood streets? Like that would be absolutely incredible, in terms of our biodiversity and also uh, just honestly, the property values would do pretty well with oak trees. They're a hardy lot. It'd be much nicer than the liquid ambers they keep insisting on planting and that die in 30 years. Um,
I would also suggest contacting Shanique Kleinhaus. She's the environmental advocate for Santa Clara Valley Bird Alliance. I just posted her email on the chat. I hope she won't mind. But if she can't help you, she could direct you to the right people in CNPS, in the Native Plant Society, because she works a lot about these plant lists and all that stuff because it is so important. And I think in San Jose, there are so many native oaks planted on our streets, and the city actually replaced dead trees with native oaks. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have so many of our native birds here, and such, high diversity of birds because they have food. Because each one of these coast live oaks can support hundreds of species of insects and provide food for birds and other things.
Hey, Rob, can you drop in your iNaturalist link regarding the Coast Live Oak?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I'll
that's
do
fun.
that.
Yeah, and the great thing of getting in contact with Shani is she knows who to talk to in the cities to get those things changed. And I think it's worth mentioning in this day and age, your voice as a citizen has the most impact the more local you are. So if you are looking to get something like the list of street trees changed for your city, that is actually a feasible goal. You probably just need to organize a couple of people to come with you at a city council meeting or something like that. So it doesn't take a whole lot of voices to make something like that change and have a positive impact when we're talking about the local city scale of things.